So if a man is not succeeding and his wife treats him as a failure, he's just going to keep doing that. Um, what does it look like for a wife to find a hero in her husband when he's not doing anything heroic in her view? How can she submit to somebody who is not being a hero? And I'm talking superficially here because I've read your book and you explain it so well, but I think that's a paradigm that some of our listeners may really wonder. Well, my husband, how can I find a hero in him? He's not a hero. Is your husband a hero? I'm Dr. Carol, and thank you for being with me here today. I hear from so many wives who feel like their husband is anything but a hero. Probably 95% of the messages I get from married people is something along the lines of, if my spouse would just do thus and so or not do thus and so, then everything would be okay. But you as a wife, we're particularly today talking to wives, you have a lot more power than you think. And there is a hero in your husband. My guest today, Dr. Juli Slattery, has released a book that I've read, and it is just, it's powerful. Finding the Hero in Your Husband, Revisited. She released a book, something along these lines, like many years ago, and it's completely rewritten, and some powerful stuff that she has learned in her own marriage and in working with people all across for years. Dr. Juli Slattery is a clinical psychologist, an author, a speaker, president and co-founder of Authentic Intimacy. She produces a weekly podcast, Java with Juli, that if you haven't listened to, you really should. She's an author of over 10 books, book studies, just amazing teacher in churches, helping men and women and the body of Christ find the authentic intimacy that God created us for. Well, today, she and I are going to be talking about finding the hero in your husband, especially when you don't think he looks anything like a hero. I think you will find this both encouraging, practical, and enlightening. So, Dr. Juli Slattery. Dr. Juli Slattery, I have been looking forward to this. You and I have had an opportunity to speak a time or two. This topic that we're going to be talking about today is just such an important one. And I just want to start by saying a great, huge thank you for your work and for being here today.
Oh, thanks, Carol. It's just been such a joy to interact with you over the years too. And you've been on my podcast and been a blessing to me. So it's really fun that I get to be a guest on yours as well.
And I just got to say to our listeners, your books, your podcast, Java with Juli, I consume them. I enjoy them, all the work that you do and the wisdom that you share. What we are going to be talking about today, Finding the Hero in Your Husband Revisited, the book that you rewrote. It's more than just revised. It's like completely rewritten. And it speaks to so many things that I hear from wives who write to me, talk to me, ask me questions, problems that they have. Probably 95% of the married people who write to me have some variation of, if my spouse would just shape up and do what they're supposed to do, then I'd be happy.
Yes.
And we're talking specifically to wives today who may be unhappy, and you have some powerful truths that can reframe, and I believe make such a big difference for women and for their marriages as God intended.
Well, that's what we hope and pray for. So thanks, Carol.
Yes. I thought what we would do is frame this conversation around some common complaints that I hear from married women who are just really, really struggling. And you unpack the ideas addressing these in the book. And I'm just so excited to get your wisdom on some of these. The first one, I hear from women quite often, something like, the church tells me I'm supposed to submit to my husband, and that's what a godly Christian wife is supposed to do. But I don't want to, and he's not worthy of submitting. And it's just, it's kind of confusing and it feels bad. And I just like you to unpack the submission thing.
Yeah, boy, we dove right into the deep end with this one,
We
didn't
did.
we? We're not
Yeah.
going to start with a light topic. Yeah, so this is a very triggering topic for a lot of women. There certainly are women listening right now who have had this biblical teaching keep them in marriages that are unhealthy and in dynamics that are even abusive.
Yeah.
And so it's a very important topic to address for that reason. But also another temptation is just to kind of write it off and say, well, this isn't working, so let's just ignore that the Bible even says it, or talk our way out of it. And so a lot of understanding submission is, you can't understand submission until you understand power.
Mm.
And so a lot of what I wrote about in Finding the Hero in Your Husband is helping wives understand that God has given them a lot of power in marriage, a lot of relational power. Proverbs 14:1 says, the wise woman builds her house, but with her own hands the foolish one tears hers down. And
Mm.
so while the average woman would think that submission means weakness, actually, if you're a weak woman, you can't submit, because submission has to do with what we do with our power.
Mm.
And so Jesus Christ was submissive to God the Father when he was here on earth. It didn't mean he was powerless. It meant actually he understood that he was equal to God, as Philippians 2 tells us, but
Right.
that he chose to use that power in a way that was channeled for a greater good.
Mm-hmm.
And so submission begins with understanding the power God has given you as a woman, and then saying, oh God, okay, God, like, how do I use this power constructively to build marriage, to build my husband's confidence and sense of safety in our relationship, instead of using my power to either hide in a corner, which is weakness, or
Mm-hmm.
using my power in a way that it's constantly competing with my husband or being critical of him. And so submission is a lot more about the spirit of your heart. It's your attitude more than, like just not saying anything, or, there's so many misunderstandings of submission. I think submissive wives, when you really understand this, you understand that there are times where you need to confront your husband. There are times you need to set boundaries. Certainly you're bringing all your strength and opinions to the marriage relationship, but you're doing it with a spirit that is not demanding or critical or competitive. You're doing it in a spirit that says, hey, I'm for you and I'm for our marriage.
Mm. You said something that I think some of our listeners might wonder about. We just kind of passed over it. You mentioned your husband and his fears, what he's
Yeah.
afraid of, and that you as a wife have power. Your husband has fears. A man has fears. Talk about that.
Yeah, a man has many fears, just like women have, and they have some unique fears that we may not be able to completely identify with. One of a man's greatest fears is failure,
Mm.
and so men kind of have this inborn struggle of, they were created to step into the world, to step into the chaos, to bring order and to make a difference. But to step into the chaos means to risk failure. And so if we even look at the kinds of films and stories that really resonate with men, they're stories of the hero, of this flawed man who has to overcome his fear in order to do something heroic. And so there's this element to which every day a woman might be waking up and subconsciously asking her husband, do you still love me? Do you still choose me? Am I still special to you?
Mm-hmm.
But a man is waking up every day with the subconscious question, am I your hero? Do you still believe in me? And so one of his greatest fears is that he's going to fail, which is why a lot of men just withdraw. They don't take risks. They don't step in and share their thoughts. And they won't lead, which is a frustration for women.
Yeah.
Because to lead means risking failure and criticism. And that's really key to understanding your power in marriage, is you have the power to decide, is my husband a hero or a zero? Like, I get to vote every day.
Yeah.
And that speaks into his deepest longings and fears.
Wow. So if a man is not succeeding and his wife treats him as a failure, he's just going to keep doing that. What does it look like for a wife to find a hero in her husband when he's not doing anything heroic in her view? How can she submit to somebody who is not being a hero? And I'm, I'm talking superficially here because I've read your book and you
Yeah.
explain it so well, but I think that's a paradigm that some of our listeners may really wonder. Well, my husband, how can I find a hero in him? He's not a hero. He's messing
Yeah,
up.
yeah. So, I'd turn it on its ear and say, how can a man love his wife when she's not acting very lovely? And there are lots of things about her that are not easy to love. You look for the things that are good. Like in Philippians 4, it says, whatever is good and lovely and true,
Mhm,
if
mhm.
anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think about these things. And our friend Linda Dillow once taught me, it doesn't say if everything is excellent or praiseworthy, but if anything. And so you can say my husband isn't leading, my husband isn't being heroic, but I guarantee you there are pockets of what he's doing that is heroic, that is praiseworthy.
Yeah.
And we tend to focus on the negative because we're disappointed in marriage and we see the way he's failing or he's not living up to our expectations, instead of saying, well, what is he doing?
Yeah.
How is he leading? How is he loving well? Something as simple as we overlook the fact that, does your husband get up and go to work and maybe endure a job that isn't very satisfying for him in this season?
Mhm,
Okay,
mhm.
well, that's a form of sacrifice. And even
Sure.
if he complains about it, and you can say, thank you. I know you don't really love your job right now, but I
Mhm.
appreciate your faithfulness and just showing up. Does your husband, you know, do the dishes and put his
Yeah.
dishes in the dishwasher? Like, you can say thank you. Thanks for doing that. That means a lot to me.
Yeah.
And so you have to be creative in looking for, how do I speak life into the ways that he is leading and he is succeeding? I think too often we think about these things as if it's an all or nothing. Like, I either
Mhm,
trust my
mhm.
husband or I don't trust him. Well, in human relationship, you're always working on building trust. There are always going to be things that you can look at and
Yeah.
say, I don't trust this piece, but this part of him, yeah, I trust 100%. I love that about him. He's so caring, or he's a good listener, or whatever is unique to your husband. And I had to do this at different times in my marriage when I was struggling with the right perspective. One time I just sat down and I was so frustrated in my marriage. First, I wrote a list of everything I was frustrated about
Yeah.
and all the ways that my husband wasn't living up to who I thought he should be. And then I turned the page and wrote down everything I was thankful for about my husband. And I sat there for like a half an hour and just wrote down everything that would come to my mind, everything from physical features to personality to
Mhm.
ways that he cared about me and showed me love. And by the end of it, I just had to confess before the Lord. Like, these
Mm.
were all
Yeah.
things that I have been overlooking.
Yeah.
And I think any of us can do that, even in situations where our marriage isn't going well.
That reminds me, Julie, before my husband passed away, I I remember I would tell him something that I liked or appreciated, or thank you, or I just noticed something that he did, and it was like he would do more of that. He wanted to
Yeah.
do more of that. It fueled him in that. With whatever I told him that I appreciated, there was more of that.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. We all react that way. We want to be in a place where we're praised,
Mhm.
and we're appreciated, and we shy away from places where we get criticism. Like, I can use an example even from today that's not even marriage related. So you and I both are in public ministry, so we speak and write, and so I was at an event a few weeks ago, and one of the things we do is we send out a survey, just kind of, hey, how did you rate this, and what was most effective, and how can you improve? And so looking through the surveys, I always get this like tense approach, like,
Yes.
oh, do they like me? Or
Yep.
and And the ones where there's a negative comment, I might read it over and over again, like, oh, I wonder if I beat myself up for not doing that right. And yes, we do learn from that, but we're more drawn to wanting to speak again or minister again if we walk away and say, wow, like I got to hear how God used me
Yep.
and the positive. And we're just wired that way. And again, men are particularly vulnerable to that kind of criticism. And so creating an atmosphere in your home where, yes, you're going to address important issues. It's not like you're going to ignore problems.
Yeah.
But the environment is, I want you to feel like you're going to always be getting positive when you're around me, and that makes your husband want to be
Yes.
with you.
So, I mean, any human would want to come closer to somebody who appreciated them. And like you're saying, that is a unique power that women have in marriage, and their husband is especially sensitive there. So, a place where your power exercised for good. Um, and I just want to circle back. That is what you are saying godly submission as a wife in marriage really is.
Yeah, it really is. It's the choice that I'm not going to use my power to have this competitive nature with my husband or critical spirit. I'm going to use my power to say, how can I build him up today? How can I be a resource to him today? And it's the attitude. And again, I think too often we look for a rule like, oh, well, you should never share your opinion unless he asks. That's foolishness. Certainly there are times where I need to keep quiet because it's not the right time to speak. But what God is really after is he's after our spirit. And so you can have a woman that hardly says anything, that has a very critical and demanding spirit. Or you can have a woman who's very confident and powerful and talkative, that has a very supportive and encouraging spirit.
Another category of complaint that I hear from wives a lot is I'm lonely. My husband's not meeting my needs. He doesn't like to, communicate. I need affection, and he's not very affectionate. And I'm just sad. I'm disappointed. I'm lonely. He's not touching my heart in the way I want him to. What would you say to a wife who's struggling with that?
Well, first of all, that's real. And I think every woman would say at some level they can identify with that in seasons of marriage or in marriage in general. And so you don't want to dismiss that and say, well, too bad, that's just life. God designed women for this deep need for connection and intimacy, and that's a good thing. And when that doesn't feel like it's being met, you experience pain. But I would also say that we never will grow in intimacy in our marriage when we're focused on our needs, because my power to impact my husband is not in what I need, it's in what he needs.
Yes.
And actually, if I'm constantly saying, you don't listen to me, or I can't connect with you, what is he really hearing? I'm a bad husband. Yeah. So again, by me expressing my needs that way, I'm actually like isolating him or making our relationship feel more unsafe. And so I know we hate hearing this because it's like, why do I have to do the work? But we really do change the environment of our marriage by first focusing on what the other person needs. And this goes back to what we were talking about earlier, that if my husband experiences me as somebody who is on his team and is supportive of what he's doing instead of being critical, he's going to want to spend more time with me. And then part of it is looking at, okay, maybe your husband's not a talker, you're a talker. Okay, how can we connect? And the same kind of goes that men like to do life together, and women like to process life. And so sometimes we're asking our husbands to interact with us in a way that they don't even have the vocabulary to do so. And so one recommendation might be, even, how do we look for a shared activity instead of expecting my husband to go out to coffee with me and just talk? How can we do a ministry together? How do we take up a new hobby and learn something together, so that there's companionship in that side-by-side activity instead of just the expectation that he's going to be able to communicate at the level that I wish he would.
Yeah. You mentioned, and I'm so glad you did, that feeling, that need in a woman's soul is real. And for a wife who's not getting that at the current time with her husband, don't you think there may be healthy ways to fill some of that from other sources? If that is a God-given need, connecting, going for coffee with a girlfriend rather than
Yes.
expecting your husband to do everything, getting some of those needs met from God. So you have something to bring to your marriage rather than looking to your husband to fill you up all the time.
Yeah, yeah. And I know, Dr. Kell, that you've experienced this even in losing your husband.
Yeah.
We are more than just wives.
Yes.
And so while marriage is important, it can't be the end all of relationships for us.
Mhm.
And so even in healthy marriages become healthy when they don't have to bear the weight of all of our emotional and relational needs. And so we want to be nurturing our relationship with the Lord and knowing God in such a way that he really does begin meeting some of those deep needs of our identity and healing wounds and things like that. But also God made us for community. And I think, one unhealthy aspect of kind of our Western church is that we feel like once you get married, you leave community.
Yes.
And you go off and you do life and you come back for a marriage retreat and then you go off and do life again. Instead of when we look at really what the New Testament teaches and really healthy culture is that we still need the body of Christ. We need community. We need friendship. And there are things that I like to do that my husband will never like to do. So I love thinking, and I'm very serious, and I love reading. And so there have been seasons of our marriage where I've just been like, I need a book club, like I have to talk to somebody about deep, thoughts. I get to do that at work now, but that way, when my husband interact, like he wants to know what I'm learning, but we're not going to spend 3 hours dissecting a passage of scripture. That's not his jam.
Yeah.
But I have to find other places to express that part of who I am.
And don't you think you are a better wife? You have more to bring to him when you acknowledge that and find the godly ways to connect in the broader sense also. You have more to bring.
Yeah, it's so true. And I also don't compare him. I would say early in our marriage, I would be frustrated that he wasn't like that. And so I might look at another Christian leader who is a man and be like, wow, I should have married somebody like that. Then we could have had theological discussions all day and all night. Instead, realizing, okay, I have that need. I need to address that need, but then also recognize that I probably wouldn't be alive if I were married to someone like that because I don't know how to shut off my brain.
Yeah.
And so my husband is God's provision to me because he'll be like, okay, Julie, come out of your submarine, come up for air. Let's have some fun. Let's watch a stupid show and laugh. And I need that.
Yes.
And so that's really helped me change my perspective.
Great, great. One of the last major topics you talk about in Finding the Hero in Your Husband Revisited is one I also hear a lot about from wives. And that is, I try to talk to him, but it always ends up in a fight. We always end up fighting and we never get anywhere. You have such a powerful perspective on no more fights. How can we do that?
Yeah. Well, one thing that really helped me was understanding that a fight and a conflict are two different things. And so people will say, I hate conflict. And I try to avoid conflict whenever I can. And you have to realize that actually is a bad perspective. You can say, I hate fighting, and we try to avoid fighting, but conflict is a natural part of relationship. Conflicts don't go away, even if you ignore them. And a conflict isn't bad. It just means that we're two different people that have two different perspectives on things. And it can be something as little as what sports team you cheer for. It can be what political party you align with. It can be as significant as your background kind of has set you up so that you don't know how to attach to me. And so when we talk about conflicts, there will always be conflict in your marriage. The secret is, how do we learn to acknowledge and address our conflict in a way that says, all right, we're different in this big or little thing. How do we as a couple find common ground and respect each other's differences? Instead of what ends up happening, which is we fight and we say, my way is better than your way.
Yeah.
And our communication is, I'm going to prove that to you in one way or another. And that's where we end up hurting each other and actually eroding intimacy instead of building it.
Mm. That reminds me of an incident with my husband also. When we got married, he had been used to an area of conflict. He had been used to sleeping with the TV on all night. I wanted it quiet and dark. And that was a conflict. There was a lot of tension. Thankfully, we didn't end up fighting about it a lot. But, he would go to bed with the TV on and I couldn't go to sleep. So once he fell asleep, I turned the TV off. And then he'd get up and go to the bathroom and turn the TV back on. And I couldn't go back, and so it was all of this. And in our case, one morning in the kitchen, not in bed fighting over the TV, but in the kitchen in the morning, we got to what was a root of the problem. He had developed some health problems and had become afraid of dying in his sleep. A TV on let him arouse himself just enough to say, I'm still in this world. I'm still here. And we both cried over that. But we got to that point, not by any of us demanding our own way. I realized that if the TV was on mute, I could position myself where the light wouldn't bother me and I could sleep. And we slept for the rest of our marriage until he went home to be with the Lord with the TV on mute. And that came by understanding what was important to each other. We both cared about each other's sleep, and we found a way to make it work. The conflict itself didn't go away in the sense that what we both wanted at night, but we found a way to make it work by understanding what was underneath.
Wow, what a beautiful example. And one of the reasons I love that example too is that you didn't just compromise on the surface without getting to a deeper understanding of why that issue was there. That's when you said you cried in the kitchen together, like that builds intimacy.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes we just want conflict to go away so quickly that we don't look for how do we work towards that connection of really understanding each other more deeply. And I also like that you said the conflict didn't go away. One of the researchers that I cite in the book is Dr. John Gottman, and he found that about 2/3 of conflict between a husband and wife never go away. So they're unresolvable. In other words, your husband's need for having that TV on wasn't going to go away, and your need to have a quiet bedroom wasn't going to go away. So you have to navigate it. And when you think about it, there's all kinds of conflicts that you will not resolve in marriage. You have different sex drives. One of you likes the house freezing, the other one likes it hot. One of you is always running late, the other one loves to be on time. One of you likes to save, one of you likes to enjoy and spend, and those things aren't going away. And so understanding those conflicts and what they represent and showing each other just love and humility and how you navigate them is really so key to building intimacy.
I love that perspective, and just acknowledging that conflict in the sense of differences and wanting things differently may very well remain. But just as I experienced myself, finding a way to truly navigate through it, that doesn't have to be the end of intimacy. It can actually build intimacy in working through that. That certainly was the case for us. Julie, there's so much goodness. I've got a lot of notes from reading this book, by the way, just some great things all the way through. You will always marry the wrong person. That got me. Another one, you will never change your husband by trying to be his mom. And you don't want to be the leader, but you don't want to be led. And those are just a few of the nuggets that just, whoa. Yeah, I just want to let our readers know there is so much here. And I think we could probably talk for another hour about, so much. But what I'd like to do is, as we kind of head toward the home stretch here, I'm sure a lot of wives who are listening to us today, and if husbands are listening, yeah, we won't tell anybody you're listening, but yeah, but especially for the wives who are intrigued that, yeah, maybe there is a hero in their husband, and how can I do that even though they're seriously unhappy right now? Can you kind of maybe give them a perspective of where do they go from here? Where do they start? Obviously, get the hero, finding the hero in your husband revisited, but just a paradigm of how they can start this journey toward not all this angst and fighting.
Yeah, I think a place that we all want to start is just seeking the Lord
Good.
and, having a heart of, God, I realize I haven't done this well, and I want to change. I want to learn. And that is an attitude where God always meets us when he says, if you ask me for wisdom, I'm going to give it to you. It's with that kind of contrite heart. That whatever you want to teach me, I'm willing to do. And then paired with that, I think is the perspective that your marriage is more important than the things you fight about. And this is something I had to come back to again and again and again over 27 years of marriage. Is there were so many areas where I felt disappointed, or my husband and I had different views on things. And yes, we need to hash those out. But at the end of the day, I wanted to be more committed to building a healthy marriage than I was to getting my way. And even like with parenting, we just became empty nesters, which is really a sweet season for us. But in the years of raising 3 boys, my husband and I had such different perspectives on so many parenting issues. And I had to keep telling myself, it's more important that Mike and I build a good marriage, that we're on the same team, than it is for me to get my way in terms of how we raise our kids. Like giving them the stability of a husband and wife vision that love each other, a mom and dad that love each other. Like that's one of the best gifts we can give them. And so even if we got the cell phone thing wrong, or they should have gone to this school instead of that school, like those are big decisions, but the bigger thing is the foundation of what we're modeling for them and who we're becoming in front of them.
Yeah.
And so that's a huge paradigm shift that, again, I had to remind myself over and over again in the midst of frustration in marriage.
Yeah. I've heard you say about talking to couples where there is a deep conflict that what the resolution is not nearly as important as how you navigate this.
Right.
What this means for your relationship versus what the end result is about whatever the conflict is about.
Yeah. And that's the idea, that you can win every argument in your marriage and still lose your marriage. And realizing that 98% of the time, the thing that we're working through is less important than our marriage. There are those exceptions where, nope, this is a hill to die on.
Yeah.
And this is a moral issue. This is, something that involves honoring God or not honoring God. And we don't want to compromise on those things. But the vast majority of things that bother us about our marriage are the inconveniences, the difference of opinion. And I want to always have the perspective that what we're building, how we love each other, is way more important than where we land on those things.
Yeah. I'm grateful you said it that way. And I've listened to you and read you and known you a while, that you are not talking about compromising when there is a true moral issue. Neither are you saying to a wife, put up with abuse. We are acknowledging that those things are there. And I just want to say to any wife who may be listening or watching, if that's the case, get some help. But in so many of the situations, building the marriage that God has in front of you is possible and worth it.
Yeah. And I'd even say it's impossible to build a marriage on an abusive dynamic.
Good.
And
You're
so,
right. Yes.
yeah,
thank you.
that's reacting out of fear. It's not building marriage. And so part of building marriage is confronting the hard things and drawing boundaries. So they're not mutually exclusive at all.
Thank you again. And in this book, you talk about that a woman exerting her power in the way we talked about earlier in the program, that in the godly way of submission, it doesn't mean standing back and letting abuse or moral problems or whatever take over. God may be calling you to stand up in some of those situations. And the status of your heart as you do that is what matters.
Yeah, absolutely. So we look at the example of Jesus.
Yes.
And he was meek and gentle and submissive to the Father, but we never once see him give way to fear or to being manipulated or controlled. And there were certainly people that were trying to do all those things to him. And so he had great courage in the midst of his humility and submission. And that's what God calls us to as well.
Beautiful. Well, Juli, thank you. There's so much richness here. And I want to say to our listeners and viewers, Finding the Hero in Your Husband Revisited, it's awesome. I've read it. Juli, where would you invite people who want to find out more? Where would you invite them to come and join you?
Yeah, the best place to find everything we're doing is our website, AuthenticIntimacy.com. So you can find the book there, which actually just came out on Audible today. So that's fun.
Yay!
And the podcast and other resources that we have, and you can connect with us at that website.
We'll make sure those links are under this video and in the show notes for the podcast. Juli, it has been a pleasure and an honor. I feel like God is doing great things through your ministry, and I'm privileged to help people know about it, and just many more blessings to you.
Thank you. Same to you, Carol.
Well, if you didn't find some encouraging or practical pieces in that conversation, then I'd encourage you to listen to it again. And I just want to emphasize one of the last things that we talked about, that if your marriage is in trouble and you are not finding the way forward, get some help. It doesn't mean that you are necessarily doing something wrong just because you get help. Just like I as a physician, the physician part of me, if I see a patient who's hurting, they may not have been doing anything wrong, but you need some outside help to kind of diagnose and help know what to do next. So if you are in a marriage where things are really in trouble, get some help. I'd encourage you to connect with Juli at AuthenticIntimacy.com. Check the links under this video. We'll make sure they're there. And check out the book, Finding the Hero in Your Husband Revisited. We also have a lot of marriage resources on our website. We have a communication guide that many people have found very helpful in their marriage. If talking has broken down between you and your husband, if you'd like a tool to help you get to talking about things without fighting, as Juli said, our Guide to Healthy Communication in Marriage can be a great tool to help you do that. And I'd love to hear from you. You can leave me a message on the contact page on our website, and I respond personally. I want to thank you for spending this time, and until next time, may God bless you.